Welcome to the Working CEO podcast, where we share real advice for busy business leaders. No business school BS, no sugarcoating, just straight talk about how to get work done. How can a social enterprise have a lasting impact on the people it serves? For today's guest, Galen Welsch, this question led him to co-found Jibu in 2012. Gibu works with developing nations to provide safe drinking water and other necessities through an innovative local franchise model. Galen's achievements as Jibu's CEO have been recognized by the BBC, Fast Company, Forbes, and now the Working CEO podcast. Stay tuned. I'm your co-host, Susanna Song, VP of Marketing at Highwire Networks, and I am here with the Working CEO, Mark Porter, CEO of Highwire Networks. Hi, good morning, Mark. Great to be here on the
Susanna.
podcast. Yeah, and we have a fascinating guest, our co-guest today on the podcast, who is currently living in Uganda. Galen, what takes you all the way to the continent of Africa?
Well, it's a long story, but I founded the business with my father about 10 years ago. So I've been based in Uganda for about 10 years now, although I'm in Accra in Ghana at the moment.
And what does Jibu stand for?
So Jibu stands for the answer or solution in Swahili. And just like the English word answer, it means respond if it's used in the imperative, or it means a solution if it's used as a noun. So we liked actually I worked in Congo during university, and there was a grocery store that had Jibu in the name. So it was one of the only Swahili words I remembered. And it was very easy to pronounce in all the countries where we wanted to start. So it became sort of the top choice just because of the fact that it was simple, short, sweet, and it had a cool meaning. And Jibu, how we set it up, is more about entrepreneurship and sort of responding to that call to co-invest as an entrepreneur than it is about anything else. So that's where the name Jibu came from.
So talk to us a little bit about what you guys do, and just provide a little background on the business problem that it solves, and why you felt that was important, the practical problems that it solved, the business opportunity that's created, and what it does in general for the entrepreneurs.
Sure. So there's really two problems that we're solving, and one is the water crisis. So the access to safe drinking water globally is not consistent, not reliable, not affordable for more than 2 billion people across the world. And at the same time, in those same markets, there's an opportunity crisis. And by opportunity crisis, I mean access to meaningful employment opportunity or business ownership opportunity. So what Jibu does is sort of kill two birds with one stone by creating a drinking water franchise model. So we partner with local entrepreneurs so that they can set up a drinking water franchise business. What that means practically is that we invest and build out a drinking water franchise where we set up a water treatment system that allows the entrepreneur to take water from any source, treat the water, package it in reusable 20-liter bottles, and then distribute to a 1 or 2 kilometer radius right around them. So basically, we're decentralizing the water treatment aspect via a local entrepreneurship model. So that's how we're set up, what we do, and the problems we're aiming to solve. We always try to summarize our North Star or mission as the number of thriving franchise owners that we launch. That's sort of where all of our metrics or KPIs feed into, is how many entrepreneurs are we setting up in a way that they can enable their community to thrive through the distribution of the products, at the same time create jobs and livelihoods for themselves through the business that they're running.
So how many to date, how many entrepreneurs have you guys set up?
So we operate in 7 countries, over about 8,500 retail points, and we have 160 production franchises that have the water treatment facility set up. So basically, each of those production franchises serves 50 to 100 retailers in their exclusive territory, and it's sort of a hub and spoke distribution model.
And then, so this sounds like a very complicated franchise because you've got a little bit of technology and a lot of layers of working through different regional. We work globally, and sometimes people say things like South America. Do a couple hundred sites in South America. Well, which countries in South America? There's 22 different ones, right? And they're all a little unique, right? So how does as a franchisor, what have been some of the biggest challenges you've run across in serving, especially that region where, got technology issues? Even getting this podcast done can be a challenge based on internet availability and things like that. How do you, what are some of the things that you've had to overcome to make this happen?
No, it's a great question. I think first off, we had to adapt the franchise model for this market because typically a franchise model is driven by the franchisees. So the franchisor will say, here's the specs, build out the franchise at your own cost, and then you use the brand and pay an ongoing royalty. In our case, the types of entrepreneurs we wanted to partner with don't have that capital. So we had to figure out a way to bring that financing up front and basically build out a turnkey franchise where the entrepreneurs could still invest something, so they have skin in the game, but they didn't have the ability. So when we launch a franchise, they invest about $4,000 and we invest about $20,000 in that build out. And what that means is we're able to partner with entrepreneurs who see this opportunity as life-changing. They're fully engaged. They're putting in their sweat and blood and tears to make the business grow. And if we found partners that maybe have that capital already, usually they're very top-end business people locally, and they might just put their nephew or niece or something in the shop to run it, and we wouldn't have the same type of engagement and traction there. So combining financing with the franchise model is one of the core aspects we had to overcome. I think the second and third biggest challenges are probably supply chain. You can't really just make an order here and expect something to arrive on time or in quality.
Like Prime, Amazon Prime, does it just?
Yeah, there's no
shipping.
Amazon Prime. There's no Amazon Prime yet. I mean, there's some startups trying to do that. And then I would say, finally, local regulators. There's a very
Some startup will probably succeed, and then Amazon will come in and crush them. So
yeah, maybe. Yeah, they'll buy them up or something. So I mean, it's happening. There's now like a Silicon Valley sort of gold rush happening. There's a lot of fintechs getting gobbled up and all of that too. So who knows? But it's around the corner. I mean, the infrastructure development in Africa is getting to the point where you definitely can have an Amazon type solution and all of that. It's definitely more difficult to put in place, but it's possible. And I think in the next 10 years, you'll see all of that. You'll see Amazon Prime probably, available in all the places where Jibu operates in sub-Saharan Africa. But yeah, the last thing I was going to say is the regulatory challenges, because, essentially, with the exception of one market where we operate, Rwanda, which is very well organized and transparent and not corrupt. Every other country we operate in, there is a relatively high level of informality, I'll say, among the regulators, and it takes a lot of relationships to get anything done versus going by the book. Often the book has never been done by before, or people don't even know what it is, and if you go by it, it leads to nowhere.
Galen, you've spent some time in Chicago, so you should be familiar with the term street tax. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, there is significant street tax, and I mean, basically, it's complicated because so in our case, we don't do the street tax, and what that means is upfront it's very slow to expand. But in the long term, we're able to go much faster because as soon as you pay the street tax once, they'll keep coming back, and you'll never get anywhere without paying more and more street tax. So it is sort of like a much longer startup period each new market we enter. But once you get through it and sort of you can tire regulators out by just continuing to try and push the process and say, no, this is the book we're following. Eventually, they can give up. So yeah, it really depends though. I mean, the relationships are still key, even in that place, but you can have relationships without the street tax.
Well, you have to have probably a lot of local levels too, right? When you're dealing with this stuff, there's probably a lot of hyper local regulation and making sure whoever the boss, another typical Chicago term, right? Whoever's the street boss in that area is probably somebody that you got to make sure is at least going to allow these things, right? Especially if you're doing it the right way.
Exactly. There's it's definitely hyper local. That's a good way to put it.
So it's an interesting thing that we talk about Amazon and things like that, but I imagine in a lot of these markets, I mean, your solution, your answer is providing something that's not really discretionary, right? I mean, it's life sustaining platform. It's something that they have to have, right? And something that is a much better alternative to water that can make you sick or probably even kill you if you get the wrong stuff, right? And certainly can't taste all that good with mud in it. But when you look at this, it is interesting. These other types of businesses, until there's discretionary income, there's really not, until there's a raging consumer economy, it'd be very hard to drive those other kinds of businesses, right? I imagine it's even hard for some of these people to get money for a better quality of water. Is that something that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it is a shocking rate of growth that's happening in especially urban areas in sub-Saharan Africa, where the wallet size is growing significantly, and there's increasing amount of discretionary spending available. That being said, premium luxury products, all that stuff is still very small market compared to what Jibu's doing, where we're only providing essential services. But I think the fact that Gibu, as an essential service that's offering an alternative to say tap water or boiled water, and requiring customers to pay for that, the fact that we've been able to get the traction we have and grow like we have is indication of that growing disposable income. I would say disposable income, but that growing income capacity of the urban populations. And I mean, it's. I think if you visit Nairobi or Accra or Kampala, you'll be shocked at the number of skyscrapers and infrastructure going in and all of that. And you'll have even you have KFC and other international brands succeeding here. Of course, they can't have a massive number of units in the city, but they could still have a few units. And there's a big enough population that they have lines out the door when they open shop. So I think it's easy to imagine Africa as sort of the Book of Mormon version of it, or sort of the what we knew of it in the 90s or whatever. But it's growing very fast, and I think it's very likely it could be a Southeast Asia type of story in the next 20 years. I mean, it will certainly have the biggest population in the world, and I think the amount of investment coming in and sort of speed of development is very impressive.
Is that part of what drove you to launch this venture? What when you look at I mean, there's days I beat my head against the wall thinking, why did I ever do this 20 years ago? And other days, a lot of those days, and other days where don't know what else I'd probably really do because I'm virtually unemployable, but especially at this point. But what was the moment where you said, hey, you know what, I want to do this really complicated thing that I can only do in Africa, and I'm gonna throw it all to the wind and roll the dice? What was that moment for you?
Yeah, well, I think there was multiple times where I had that moment where I had to redecide again, if this is what I want to be. What did you do?
I think we all go through that, right? Like
I
sometimes
think
multiple times in a day. So.
yeah, exactly.
But
Rolling
you're
the dice
also
all the
living in
time.
Africa. I mean, that's a huge sacrifice. You are living in Africa.
Yes,
You were
yeah,
born and
true.
raised in the
And
US.
that
Yeah.
exactly that decision itself was another one of those moments. But if I go all the way back to the initial inspiration, I was in the Peace Corps in Morocco in North Africa, and one of the unique components of the Peace Corps is you have to raise your own resources for those projects. And so I sort of came face to face with a lot of the traditional development work or charity work by raising that grant funding for the projects. And ultimately, I found there was just such a big disconnect between the capacity of the community I was in, the desires and wishes of the community I was in, and what the resources were available for the community. And it felt very patronizing and top down. And I in no way do I think I don't want to demonize charity altogether or traditional philanthropy altogether. But in, particularly in development work, there is a tendency or a large pattern for there to be patronizing or sort of pity driven top down approaches to it. So when I saw that, I just felt, you know what, I think the biggest difference that can be made in the world is actually through business, because the dreams and passions of everyone I've met, all these friends I've made in Morocco, are, to send their kids to good schools, to earn a meaningful income, to build a house for their family, all the same things that everyone around the world wants. And instead I could get $50,000 in an hour for a hand washing lessons, instead. But it was very difficult to sort of create a trade school or that type of training, because it wasn't as much of a sexy story. So coming away from that experience, I was really passionate about how can we create an entrepreneurship opportunity, basically leveraging what I think as Americans we learned by osmosis through a very sort of free market and capitalistic market. We see examples of premium service and operations all over, and that sort of led to the idea of, well, a franchise model could be the perfect thing, because it gives the tracks to run in for an entrepreneur, and at the same time creates that entrepreneurial independence, which is very, very much front and center as far as passions and alignment with local interests. So anyways, I was having all those thoughts. I came back, was visited my parents on the way to DC, and then my father he was working he had sold a tech company and had spent like 6 months looking around what to do. And essentially he wanted to figure out how can he use his business experience to do something more meaningful. So we first started talking about it. He was talking about water, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And then I guess after a couple of weeks, we just kept talking and then getting deeper into it. And we never even made a clear decision. Okay, we're going to do this. It just sort of was a slippery slope, and we ended up being too deep to do anything else, and just ran forward with it. And I was really fortunate that, it's sort of an unfair advantage as an entrepreneur. He was the first investor and funded our pilots. And then from there, we were able to go and raise outside investment with our first seed round of capital about 3 years later, after we had all of those pilots fail. we relaunched one. That was another one of those moments where you felt like you had to roll the dice again, but we decided to relaunch one of them. That got successful, and then we were able to raise outside capital and start scaling from there in 2015.
But that's an interesting part there. I mean, being out on a limb, out raising capital, out talking to people about your solution and about your business model, all the while knowing there's cracks, right? And you got to figure out what those cracks are and how to fix them. And that's not different than, I think every entrepreneur we talk to has that story where you have these moments where you're trying to figure out, how the hell is this ever going to work, right? How do I ever get this thing to scale? If I got 3 and they don't work, how do I get to 30? How do I get to 60? How do I scale this thing? It doesn't matter. This is one of the reasons that we set out to do this podcast, is to share with everybody who's in that exact moment, that you're not alone, right? I mean, that's I don't know, Suzanne, I think everybody has that inflection point, and they come in waves, right?
Yeah.
And they might come day after day after day for a while, and all those things. So Galen, what would you tell yourself? The one thing we ask everybody, sort of the only commonality across these, what would today's version of you tell the version of yourself starting out, that as you look back, you think about this, what would you do differently? What would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, first of all, everyone knows the common that 0 to 1 is the hardest phase. And I have to say, I don't agree with that. I think it's really the 2 to 10 phase that's the most difficult, because when you're doing 0 to 1, you sort of have everyone rooting for you. You have an excitement. You have the beginner's luck kind of thing. You more or less have that energy and backing from everyone, just sort of cheering you on, saying, "Yeah, you made the brave step. You're going for it." And there's like this Goethe quote that's, action has I can't remember the quote exactly, but action has magic and grace in it, essentially. And so I think the 0 to 1 step is fun and sort of easier, and it's the 2 to 10 phase of building the business after there's proof of concept, and when you really start scaling, where it then takes that ability to continue to reinvent yourself and sort of shed your skin again and again, and adapt your leadership style, your management, your focus, your priorities. Even culture has to shift over time, all that type of stuff. So I think what I would tell myself is to, not hesitate to make that metamorphosis more quickly, as we change phases. So sort of be willing to take more time to reflect at the bigger picture level, sort of outside the business, on a regular, frequency, to be able to make those transformations more quickly as we go from 2 to 3, as we go from 3 to 4, and each step along the way. I think it's so demanding and heads down, building something through challenges and all this. It's, at least for me, been very easy to be so deep in the business that I don't take the time to step back and look at the big picture and figure out how we need to shift, to adjust even some of the fundamental aspects as we reach different phases of growth. Because, a business at scale is just such a different animal than obviously a startup, as far as what the culture needs to be, the processes, all of those aspects.
There's some really, really great wisdom in that, Galen. And it's, there's some things that reminds me of things that I've learned along the way. And one of the things is, about scale, and that looking at yourself as a limiting factor to scale is something that you have to constantly assess. And we started scaling, and people ask, when did it really start to take off? Our business started to really take off when I realized I wasn't that important, and that if I hired good people and let them do what they were supposed to do, the business could do far better than it was doing. And then the other thing that I think is really important takeaway for people that you hit on, I by the way, wholeheartedly agree with your thesis. It's easy to start out because you're excited. People are excited for you. And if you look at the entrepreneurial mindset, the sort of person who says, I'm going to take this chance and put my house on the line, or risk everything I've got, or hell, just risk my reputation, right? Just risk failing publicly and in front of everybody. That mindset doesn't lend itself to that 2 to 10 phase, where it's about putting policies in place and procedures in place and maintaining certain things while growing others. And it's hard. It's a grind, right? And one of my shareholders once asked me, what's your fastball? And I said, I like talking to customers. I like coming up with ideas. I like creating new things. And he said, then spend all of your time doing that. We'll find the best people to put in place behind you to operate the business. They're a dime a dozen. He said, you can find good operators. always use your fastball. And I thought that was very insightful. And that was 2016, 2017. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, and we were already well into our growth journey, and as a company, something like 16 years old, I think. So those are great points, Galen. And I think if people take a couple things away from this, it's really those points that you have to be willing to constantly reinvent, constantly assess yourself, and make sure that you're putting that help in place around you, and make sure you're not limiting the growth of the business.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of what's your fastball, and I definitely think that's a common theme for all of us as CEOs, getting out of our own way and not being the cork in our own bottle kind of thing. And I think that trust, that ownership is so key. I think for us, a key theme of being able to scale has been decentralizing ownership and responsibilities and forfeiting a lot of that control that is so tempting to hold on to. And I think you see that as a common theme across lots of businesses that have scaled globally is that ability to empower a lot of people further and further away from the original idea to get on board and sort of create a movement around building something rather than having a sort of tightly controlled. Of course, there's exceptions in places where the biggest company in the world, like Apple, is the opposite of that and all this. But I think you see more examples of Google's and Berkshire Hathaway's where you have that decentralized model being the only way to sort of keep up with population growth and in a moving market.
Hey, Galen, I have one quick question before we wrap this episode up. Why was it important for you to hire female franchisees? I believe at least 50% of your franchisees are women.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, to be honest, our whole goal is to create this opportunity engine and create business ownership, meaningful business ownership opportunity in the markets we serve. So if we're doing that and perpetuating an unfair, unequal balance between male and female entrepreneurs, we're actually having the opposite of a positive impact. We're actually furthering a world or situation or imbalance that we don't want to. So for us, it was just sort of, okay, we have about 50% of the population is female, 50% male, so we need to have at least half of our entrepreneurs be female. And it's turned out that, that's been pretty rewarding actually, because the female entrepreneurs actually perform better. They've been more trustworthy. They have less debt. It's just been much more successful working with female owners. Actually, our top, I think out of our top 5 entrepreneurs, three of them are women, and they're just powerhouses and have really, I think, helped to define the brand too. The other aspect is we're selling essential products and services, and if anything, women have even more say over that in the household level than men. So maybe we should have even more than 50%, but that's been our initial target.
That's awesome.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much, Galen Welsch. In spite of some of the challenges with the internet and all that, we're just so grateful to have you on our show. So Galen, hopefully we can have you back on the show in a few years to catch up with you again. And thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us. If you do have feedback or questions about our podcast, please contact us at podcast@highwirenetworks.com or leave a comment. And be sure to join us for our next episode of The Working CEO. You are what you eat, or maybe where you eat. Award-winning broadcast journalist Kate Sullivan on why she launched To Dine For television. Until next time, I'm Susanna Song.
And I'm Mark Porter.
And this is The Working CEO. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of The Working CEO. Remember, whether your collar is blue or white, roll up your sleeves and let's get real. The Working CEO is made possible by Highwire Networks, a leading global provider of technical, professional, electrical, and managed cybersecurity services, serving businesses in more than 180 countries. To learn more, visit highwirenetworks.com.